I arrived at the Northeast Entrance Ranger Station on the second Tuesday of September, when the aspens had already turned and the first freeze warnings were posted for the high country. The supervisor met me at the gate with a laminated park map, 2 radio batteries, and a clipboard thick with intake forms. His name was Kendall. He wore the standard green and gray uniform but kept his sleeves rolled even though the wind off Soda Butte Creek made my fingers ache. "You're replacing Harris," he said, checking my license against the paperwork. "He lasted 4 months." I signed where he pointed. The pen was cold. "Medical leave?" "Something like that." Kendall folded the forms and tucked them under his arm. "You've got winter housing in cabin 12, generator access twice a week, and the patrol route covers Slough Creek to Pebble Creek. 18 miles one way. You'll do it on foot most nights because the roads close at 7. I had expected isolation. I had not expected 18 miles. "What about the other rangers?" "Dispatch is Marcia. She works out of Mammoth 52 miles west. You'll hear her on Channel 4 every 2 hours during your shift. Davidson patrols the southern perimeter out of Tower Junction, but you won't overlap. Your sector is solo." He handed me a key ring with 6 keys, each tagged with faded masking tape. Cabin, supply shed, maintenance gate, equipment locker, fuel pump, and one labeled simply North. "The North key?" "There's a structure past Warm Creek. You won't go inside, but you'll check the lock every 3rd night. It's on the route." Kendall walked me to the cabin. The interior smelled like pine cleaner and mouse droppings. A propane heater squatted in the corner. The furniture was functional: a cot, a table, 2 folding chairs, a metal locker for gear. Someone had left a stack of topographic maps on the table, each one annotated in blue ink with distances and times. "Your shift runs from 1900 hours to 0600, Kendall said. "That's 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. for the next 6 weeks, then we rotate if you're still here. You'll patrol the primary route Monday through Thursday. Fridays you inventory the supply shed and file a report. Weekends you monitor from the cabin unless Marcia calls you out." He opened the locker and pointed to the contents: a mag light, a backup radio, a first aid kit, 12 road flares, a coil of yellow nylon rope, a canister of bear spray, and a small canvas bag that rattled when he lifted it. "Salt," he said. "For the ice. You'll need it on the footbridges after midnight." I nodded, though the nights were not yet cold enough for ice. Kendall set a 3-ring binder on the table. The cover was unlabeled. "This is your operational manual. Read it tonight before your first shift. Follow every instruction exactly as written. If you have questions, radio Marcia, but only during standard check-in windows. Do not improvise. Do not assume a rule is outdated or unnecessary. People who improvise don't finish their contracts." "What happened to Harris?" Kendall looked at me for a long moment, then walked to the door. "Read the manual," he said. "I'll be back in 6 weeks for the rotation review." He left. I heard his truck grinding up the gravel road until the sound faded into the wind. I made coffee on the propane stove and opened the binder. The first page was a typed list, single-spaced with narrow margins. The header read, "Night Patrol Operational Guidelines, Northeast Sector." No author, no date. The text began immediately. 1. Your shift begins at exactly 1900 hours. Set your watch to the atomic clock in the equipment locker before each shift. Variances of more than 30 seconds are not acceptable. 2. Patrol the primary route in the order listed on the attached map. Do not deviate from the route. Do not take shortcuts. If a trail is blocked by fallen timber or other obstruction, return to the cabin and radio Marcia. Do not attempt to clear the obstruction yourself. 3. Between 2200 hours and 2215 hours, you will pass the southern window of the abandoned Lamar Ranger Station. Do not look at this window during this interval. If you must pass during this time, keep your eyes on the trail. After 15 hours, you may look at the building as needed. 4. You will hear elk bugling throughout your shift. This is normal. If you hear bugling that does not stop for more than 4 minutes, move at least 60 yards away from the sound and wait. Do not approach. Do not record it. When the bugling stops, continue your patrol. 5. The footbridge at Slough Creek must be crossed in fewer than 12 seconds. Count your steps as you cross. If you count more than 12 steps, stop immediately, return to the south bank and wait 5 minutes before attempting to cross again. Do not look at the water while crossing. 6. You will carry the standard issue radio on Channel 4. Marcia will check in at 2100, 2300, 0100, 0300, and 0500 hours. Respond with your designation and location. If Marcia uses your first name during a check-in, do not respond. End the transmission and return to the cabin immediately. 7. Do not acknowledge voices that call your name unless you can see the person speaking. If you hear your name called from the forest, continue walking. Do not answer. Do not look for the source. 8. The structure past Warm Creek is marked with a red triangle on your map. Check that the lock is secure, but do not touch the door handle. Do not attempt to see inside. If the lock is missing or open, do not approach the door. Return to the cabin and file a written report. Do not radio this information. 9. You may encounter other hikers or campers during your patrol. This is rare but possible. If someone approaches you and asks for directions, provide them. If someone approaches you and asks what time it is, tell them you don't know. Do not check your watch in their presence. Do not give them the correct time. 10. Between 0200 hours and 0245 hours, you may see lights moving through the forest east of Pebble Creek. These lights will appear to be headlamps or flashlights. Do not follow them. Do not signal to them. Continue your patrol as scheduled. 11. If you find a campfire that is still burning, note the location and report it during your next check-in. Do not extinguish the fire. Do not approach closer than 30 feet. If someone is sitting at the fire, do not speak to them. Mark the location on your map and continue. 12. The maintenance shed at the Pebble Creek access point contains emergency supplies. You are authorized to access these supplies only if you have radioed Marcia and received explicit verbal confirmation. The code for the shed lock is written on the inside cover of this binder. Do not share this code. Do not write it down elsewhere. 13. If you see a person wearing a Park Service uniform that you do not recognize, do not engage them in conversation. Nod if they nod, but do not speak. Do not ask for their name or assignment. If they ask you to accompany them, decline politely and continue your patrol. 14. At the end of your shift, you will return to the cabin and secure all windows and doors. Fill out the patrol log with your start time, end time, and any incidents. Use black ink only. Do not leave gaps in the log. If there were no incidents, write "no incidents" in the incident column. The list ended there. No signature, no explanatory notes. I read it 3 times. Some rules made operational sense. The atomic clock, the radio check-ins, the report protocols. Others felt arbitrary, like the window at the Lamar station or the 12-second bridge crossing. A few were unsettling in ways I could not articulate. The emphasis on time, the warnings about voices and lights, the instruction to avoid certain people in uniform. I thought about Harris and his medical leave. I made more coffee and studied the map. The route was a rough loop that began at the cabin, followed Slough Creek north for 4 miles, crossed to Pebble Creek, traced the ridgeline east, and returned south through a series of switchbacks and access roads. 18 miles. The estimated time, according to the blue annotations, was 9 hours at a steady pace. That left 2 hours of margin before the end of shift. I noticed the red triangle past Warm Creek. It was not labeled. The structure it marked sat a quarter-mile off the main trail, accessible by a thin line that might have been a footpath or a game trail. I checked the inside cover of the binder for the maintenance shed code. Someone had written it in pencil, 4723. I tried to sleep but couldn't. At 1800 hours, I ate a meal bar and dressed in layers. I synced my watch to the atomic clock in the equipment locker. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees. I loaded my pack with the radio, the mag light, the flares, the salt, and the manual. I left the cabin at exactly 1900 hours. The first mile was easy. The trail was wide and well-maintained, cutting through lodgepole forest that smelled like resin and dry grass. The sun had set behind the peaks, leaving a pale orange band along the western horizon. I kept a steady pace, checking my watch every 10 minutes. The forest was quiet except for the wind and the occasional rustle of something small in the underbrush. At 2000 hours, I radioed Marcia. "Dispatch, this is Northeast 12, radio check." Her voice came back crisp and immediate. "Northeast 12, dispatch, receiving you clear, proceed." "Northeast 12, proceeding on primary route, no incidents." "Copy, Northeast 12. Next check at 2100. I continued north. The trail descended toward Slough Creek, where the forest opened into a meadow dotted with sagebrush. The creek was low, exposing gravel bars that gleamed in the last light. I reached the footbridge at 2047 hours. The bridge was a simple timber structure, perhaps 20 feet long, with railings on both sides. The water beneath it moved fast and shallow, hissing over stones. I stopped at the south end and took out the manual, confirming the instruction. Fewer than 12 seconds. "Do not look at the water." I reset my watch to stopwatch mode and started across, keeping my eyes on the far bank. I counted my steps aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I reached the north side and stopped the watch. 11 seconds. I looked back at the bridge. It looked ordinary. The water looked ordinary. I kept walking. The northern section of the route climbed through a series of switchbacks that left me breathing hard. The forest thickened, and the darkness became total except for the narrow cone of my flashlight. I passed a cluster of boulders marked with cairns, then a lightning-scarred snag that the map labeled as Marker 7. At 2100 hours, I stopped and radioed Marcia. "Dispatch, Northeast 12. Check in at Marker 7, no incidents." "Copy, Northeast 12. Marker 7 at 2100. Weather advisory in effect for 0300 hours. Possible gusts to 40 knots. Proceed with caution." "Copy, dispatch." I ate a ration bar and drank water. The wind was already picking up, moving through the canopy in waves. I continued east, following the trail as it leveled out along a ridge. At 2143 hours, I saw the Lamar Ranger Station through the trees. It was a small A-frame structure, dark and clearly abandoned. The windows were intact but filthy, a rusted antenna tilted from the roof. I checked my watch, 2144. The restricted window was from 2200 to 2215. I had 16 minutes to pass the building safely. I increased my pace, but the trail curved closer to the station before angling away. At 2158, I was parallel to the southern window, perhaps 30 yards away. I kept my eyes on the trail. At 2200 exactly, I heard a sound like knuckles tapping on glass. I did not look. The tapping continued, slow and rhythmic. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. I walked faster, focusing on the beam of my flashlight and the shape of the trail. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. The tapping stopped. I checked my watch. 22:04. 11 more minutes. At 22:16, I allowed myself to glance back. The station was dark and still. I saw nothing at the southern window. I continued east toward Pebble Creek. The wind strengthened as I descended from the ridge. It carried the smell of sagebrush and something metallic like ozone before a storm. At 2300 hours, I radioed Marcia from a clearing near the Pebble Creek access point. Dispatch Northeast 12, check in at Pebble Creek access, no incidents. Copy Northeast 12, Pebble Creek at 2300. Wind advisory now 45 knots, secure all equipment. Copy dispatch. I cinched my pack and continued south. The trail here was rougher, strewn with loose stones that clicked under my boots. I passed the maintenance shed and verified the lock without stopping. At 23:38 hours, I heard elk bugling. The sound came from the west, a high, wavering call that echoed through the drainage. I stopped and listened. The bugling continued. One bull, then another, then a third, overlapping the others. This was normal. Elk bugled during the rut, and September was peak season. But the calls did not stop. I checked my watch and began counting. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The bugling grew louder, more frantic, layering into a chorus that made my teeth ache. 3 minutes, 4 minutes. At 4 minutes and 10 seconds, I moved 60 yards south and waited. The bugling stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound. I waited 5 more minutes, then continued my patrol. My hands were shaking. At 0100 hours, I radioed Marcia from the southern switchback. Dispatch, Northeast 12. Check in at southern switchback. Incident to report. Go ahead, Northeast 12. Elk bugling exceeded 4 minutes at 23:38 hours. Applied protocol and moved 60 yards. Bugling ceased. There was a pause. Then, copy Northeast 12. Incident logged. Continue patrol. Copy dispatch. I ate another ration bar and drank water. The wind had become a steady roar, bending the trees and sending debris skittering across the trail. I pulled my hood up and kept walking. At 0200 hours, I entered the section of trail east of Pebble Creek. The forest was dense here, and my flashlight seemed dimmer, the beam swallowed by the darkness. At 0214, I saw lights moving through the trees. They were perhaps 100 yards to my east, bobbing and weaving like headlamps worn by hikers. There were 3 of them, spaced irregularly. They moved up slope parallel to my position, then stopped. I kept walking. I did not signal. I did not call out. The lights began moving again, faster now, converging. They reached a point directly east of me and stopped again. I could see them clearly. 3 steady white lights, unblinking, hovering at chest height. They did not sway like headlamps. They did not dim or brighten. I checked my watch. 0221. The lights began moving toward me. I increased my pace, focusing on the trail. The lights kept pace, closing the distance. 50 yards, 40 yards. I could hear branches snapping, but the sounds were irregular, as if whatever carried the lights did not walk on 2 legs. 30 yards. I did not run. I maintained my pace and kept my eyes forward. At 0228, the lights stopped. I glanced east. They were gone. I continued to the cabin without further incident, arriving at 0543 hours. I secured the windows and doors, filled out the patrol log in black ink, and noted the elk bugling and the lights. I did not mention the tapping at the Lamar station window because I had not looked, and therefore I had not seen. I made coffee and sat at the table, too tired to sleep but too wired to rest. At 0600 hours, I radioed Marcia for the final check-in. Dispatch Northeast 12, shift complete, returning to standby. Copy Northeast 12, standby for next assignment at 1900 hours. I hung the radio on its hook and lay down on the cot. I closed my eyes and tried to forget the sound of knuckles on glass. I slept through the afternoon and woke at 1700 hours. My body ached from the 18-mile patrol and my boots had rubbed blisters on both heels. I treated them with moleskin and tape, ate a freeze-dried meal and prepared for the second shift. At 1900 hours, I began the patrol again. The routine became familiar over the next 3 nights. I learned the rhythm of the check-ins, the placement of the markers, the places where the trail narrowed or the footing was treacherous. I crossed the Slough Creek Bridge in 10 seconds, then 9. I passed the Lamar station during safe hours and saw nothing unusual. I heard elk bugling twice more, but neither exceeded 4 minutes. On the 4th night, I checked the structure past Warm Creek. I left the main trail at 22:36 hours, following the thin path marked on the map. The terrain was steep, choked with deadfall and brambles. I used my flashlight sparingly, picking my way upslope by moonlight. At 22:51 hours, I reached a clearing. The structure was a small concrete bunker partially buried in the hillside. The door was steel, painted green but flaking with rust. A heavy padlock secured the latch. Above the door, someone had painted a red triangle, now faded and streaked with lichen. I approached to within 10 feet and checked the lock. It was secure. I did not touch the door handle. I did not attempt to see inside, though there was a narrow gap between the door and the frame that might have allowed a view if I had bent down and aimed my flashlight. I marked the check in my log and returned to the main trail. On Friday, I inventoried the supply shed as instructed. The shed was a small wooden structure behind the cabin, stocked with the basics: canned food, water purification tablets, batteries, toilet paper, propane canisters, duct tape, tarps, rope, and 12 more bags of salt. I counted everything twice and filled out the inventory form. The numbers matched the previous week's count except for salt, which was down by 1 bag. I had used it on the footbridges as instructed. I filed the report in the binder and spent the afternoon cleaning my gear. On Saturday, I monitored from the cabin. Marcia radioed at 2100 hours with a weather update. Clear skies, low 40s, no advisories. I acknowledged and returned to reading a paperback novel I had brought from Bozeman. At 2300 hours, Marcia radioed again. Northeast 12. Dispatch. Possible hiker distress call from Slough Creek area. Can you respond? I grabbed my pack and radio. Copy, dispatch. Responding. What's the location? Last known position approximately 2 miles north of your cabin, East Bank. Caller reported hearing someone calling for help but lost signal before we could verify. Copy, dispatch. Proceeding to location. I left the cabin at 23:08 hours and moved quickly up the trail. The night was clear and cold, the stars dense overhead. I reached the 2-mile mark at 23:34 hours and stopped to listen. I heard nothing except the creek and the wind. I moved along the east bank, sweeping my flashlight across the terrain. At 23:41 hours, I heard a voice. Help! It was faint, distant, coming from somewhere upstream. I keyed the radio. Dispatch Northeast 12, I have audible contact. Male voice calling for help, moving to investigate. Copy, Northeast 12, proceed with caution. I moved upstream, following the voice. It called again. Help! Over here! I rounded a bend and saw a figure standing on the opposite bank. It was a man wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He waved at me. Hey, I need help! I stopped and aimed my flashlight at him. He was perhaps 40 years old, clean-shaven with short hair. He looked cold but uninjured. What's the problem? I called. I got separated from my group. I don't know where I am. I studied him. He was standing on the west bank, which meant he would have had to cross the creek to reach my position. The creek was too deep and fast to ford safely at night. How did you get over there? I asked. He hesitated. I crossed at a bridge, but I can't find it again. There was no bridge upstream for another 3 miles. What's your name? I asked. Tom Harris. I felt my stomach tighten. Harris was the ranger I had replaced. What time is it? The man asked. I kept my flashlight on him. I don't know. Can you check your watch? No. The man stared at me. His expression did not change. He did not blink. "Can you help me cross?" he asked. "No," I said. "Stay where you are. I'm going to radio for assistance." I backed away slowly, keeping the flashlight on him. He did not move. When I was 20 yards downstream, I keyed the radio. "Dispatch, Northeast 12. I have visual contact with an individual on the west bank, 2.3 miles north of cabin. He identifies as Tom Harris, requesting guidance." There was a long pause. Then Marcia's voice, careful and deliberate. "Northeast 12, confirm you said Tom Harris." "Affirmative, dispatch." "Northeast 12, Tom Harris is not in your sector. Do not engage. Return to cabin immediately and file a written report." "Copy, dispatch." I looked back upstream. The man was still standing on the opposite bank, watching me. I turned and walked quickly toward the cabin. I did not look back again. I filed the report at 01:15 hours. I described the encounter in precise detail. The voice, the location, the man's appearance, his claim to be Harris, his request for the time, his request for help crossing. I noted that I had not checked my watch and had not assisted him. I sealed the report in an envelope and placed it in the outgoing bin as instructed. I tried to sleep but couldn't. On Sunday night, my shift proceeded without incident until 02:33 hours, when I encountered a person in a Park Service uniform. I was descending the southern switchback when I saw him walking uphill toward me. He wore the standard green and gray uniform with a campaign hat and a radio on his belt. He was older, perhaps 60, with a gray beard and wire-rimmed glasses. He nodded as we approached each other. I nodded back, but did not speak. He stopped a few feet away. "Cold night," he said. I said nothing. "You're the new ranger," he said. "Northeast sector." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm stationed at Tower Junction," he said. "Davidson. We're neighbors, more or less." I nodded again, but did not reply. Davidson studied me for a moment, then smiled slightly. "You've read the manual." I remained silent. "Good," he said. "Keep reading it." He stepped past me and continued up the trail. I listened to his footsteps fade into the distance, then continued my patrol. At 0300 hours, I radioed Marcia. "Dispatch, Northeast 12. Check in at Southern Switchback. Incident to report. Go ahead, Northeast 12. Encountered individual in Park Service uniform at 02:33 hours. He identified as Davidson from Tower Junction. I did not engage in conversation per protocol." Another pause, then, "Copy, Northeast 12. Incident logged. Did he ask you to accompany him?" "Negative, dispatch." "Copy, continue patrol." I finished the shift without further incident and returned to the cabin at 05:51 hours. On Monday, Kendall returned for the rotation review. He arrived at 1400 hours and inspected the cabin, the patrol logs, and the inventory reports. He read my incident reports without comment, then sat across from me at the table. "You're still here," he said. "Yes." "How are you handling the nights?" "I follow the protocols." Kendall nodded. "Good. The protocols exist for a reason. People who follow them tend to complete their contracts. People who don't tend to leave early, like Harris." "What happened to Harris?" Kendall looked at me for a long moment. "He stopped following the protocols. He thought he knew better. He thought the rules were suggestions." "What did he do?" "He looked at the southern window during the restricted interval. He followed the lights east of Pebble Creek. He opened the door at the structure past Warm Creek." I waited. "We found him 3 days later," Kendall said. "He was walking in circles near Slough Creek, 50 yards from the trail. He couldn't remember his name. He couldn't remember where he was. He kept saying the same thing over and over. I just wanted to see." Kendall stood and walked to the door. "There are amended protocols in the binder now," he said. "Read them tonight. They tighten some of the existing rules and add a few new ones. Follow them exactly." He left. I heard his truck grinding up the gravel road. I opened the binder and found a new section typed on the same plain paper as the original guidelines. The header read, "Amended Operational Guidelines, Northeast Sector. 1. Rule 3 is amended as follows. Between 2200 hours and 2230 hours, do not approach within 50 yards of the abandoned Lamar Ranger Station. If you must pass during this time, use the alternate trail marked in red on your updated map. After 2230 hours, you may use the primary trail. 2. Rule 7 is amended as follows. Do not acknowledge voices that call your name, your designation, or any name you recognize. If you hear such a voice, continue walking and increase your pace. Do not run. 3. If you encounter a campfire that is still burning, do not approach closer than 50 feet. If you see a person sitting at the fire, note whether they are facing the fire or facing away from it. If they are facing away from the fire, mark the location and retreat immediately. Do not file a radio report. File a written report upon return to the cabin. 4. The footbridge at Slough Creek must now be crossed in fewer than 10 seconds. Count your steps as you cross. If you count more than 10 steps, do not stop. Continue across and do not return to the south bank. Do not use this bridge again for 72 hours. Use the alternate ford marked on your updated map. 5. Between 0100 hours and 0130 hours, you may hear someone walking behind you on the trail. Do not turn around. Do not stop. If the footsteps match your pace, alter your speed slightly. The footsteps should fall out of sync. If they do not, continue walking until you reach the next marked location, then stop for exactly 2 minutes. The footsteps should cease. Do not turn around during this interval. 6. If you encounter a person who asks you to take their photograph, decline politely. If they insist, tell them your camera is broken. Do not allow them to use your phone or any device you are carrying. 7. The structure past Warm Creek must now be checked every other night instead of every third night. The lock must be secure and the door must be flush with the frame. If the door is ajar by even an inch, do not approach. Do not close it. Return to the cabin immediately and file a written report. Do not radio this information. 8. Do not accept food, water, or any item offered by hikers or campers you encounter. If someone offers you something, say no thank you and continue your patrol. Do not explain why you are declining. 9. If you hear a child crying in the forest, do not investigate. Note the time and location in your log, but do not leave the trail. If the crying continues for more than 3 minutes, radio Marcia immediately and request guidance. Do not approach the source of the crying under any circumstances. 10. At the end of your shift, before securing the cabin, step outside and count the windows. There should be 4, 2 facing south, 1 facing east, 1 facing north. If you count a different number, do not enter the cabin. Radio Marcia and wait for instructions. I read the amendments 3 times, then updated my map with the alternate trails. The red-marked route around the Lamar station added half a mile to the patrol. The alternate ford at Slough Creek was 2 miles upstream from the bridge. I checked the cabin windows before my shift. There were 4. That night I used the alternate trail around the Lamar station. It took me through a section of forest so dense that my flashlight barely penetrated the canopy. I heard no tapping on glass. At 01:12 hours, I heard footsteps behind me. I did not turn around. The footsteps matched my pace exactly, boot on stone, boot on dirt, boot on gravel. I slowed. The footsteps slowed. I increased my pace. The footsteps increased. I checked my watch. 01:14. I continued walking until I reached marker 9, a lightning-scarred pine that marked the eastern ridge. I stopped and counted slowly to 120. The footsteps stopped. I waited the full 2 minutes, then continued my patrol. I did not hear the footsteps again. On Wednesday, I checked the structure past Warm Creek. The lock was secure and the door was flush with the frame. On Thursday, I crossed the Slough Creek Bridge in 9 seconds. On Friday, I inventoried the supply shed and noted that 2 more bags of salt were missing. The count did not match my usage. I filed the discrepancy in the report. On Saturday night, I heard a child crying. It was 02:47 hours and I was moving through a section of trail near Pebble Creek. The crying came from the south, perhaps 50 yards into the forest. It was high-pitched and desperate, the sound of a young child in distress. I stopped and noted the time and location in my log. The crying continued. I counted the seconds. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The child was sobbing now, gasping for breath between cries. At 3 minutes and 10 seconds, I keyed the radio. Dispatch, Northeast 12, audible contact with child crying in forest. Location is Pebble Creek, 02:47 hours, requesting guidance. Marcia's response was immediate. Northeast 12, do not investigate. Do not leave the trail. Continue your patrol. Copy, dispatch. The crying stopped abruptly, as if someone had turned off a switch. I continued my patrol. My hands were shaking again. On Sunday, I encountered a hiker who asked me to take his photograph. It was 23:21 hours, and I was near the southern switchback when I saw him standing on the trail ahead. He was young, perhaps 25, wearing a red jacket and a black backpack. He waved as I approached. "Hey," he said, "perfect timing. Can you take a picture of me?" He held out a phone. "My camera's broken," I said. "I'm not asking you to use your camera. I'm asking you to use mine." "No, thank you," I said and continued walking. "Come on, man," he called after me. "It'll take 2 seconds." I did not respond. I kept walking. When I glanced back a minute later, he was gone. At the end of my shift, I stepped outside the cabin and counted the windows. There were 4. On Monday, Kendall did not return for the review. Instead, Marcia radioed at 1400 hours. Northeast 12 dispatch. Kendall is unavailable. Your rotation review is postponed. Continue current assignment. Copy, dispatch. Is there a problem? Negative, Northeast 12. Kendall is handling an incident at Tower Junction. He will contact you when available. Copy. I did not hear from Kendall for another week. During that week, the forest began to change. The aspens lost their leaves and the nights grew colder, dropping into the 20s. Ice formed on the footbridges and I used the salt as instructed. The elk stopped bugling. The wind carried the smell of snow. On the second Monday of October, I found a campfire still burning. It was 01:33 hours, and I was moving through the drainage east of Pebble Creek. I smelled smoke before I saw the fire, a sharp wood smoke scent that cut through the cold. I stopped and scanned the area with my flashlight. The fire was 40 feet off the trail, burning in a small clearing. It was a proper campfire ringed with stones with split logs arranged in a neat stack nearby. The flames were steady and bright, as if someone had just fed them. I moved closer, staying at the 50-foot limit. I saw no tent, no backpack, no gear. Just the fire and the split logs. Then I saw the person. They were sitting on a log at the edge of the clearing, facing away from the fire. They wore a dark jacket and a hood. I could not see their face. They did not move. I marked the location on my map and retreated immediately. I did not radio Marcia. I filed a written report when I returned to the cabin at 05:38 hours. On Tuesday, I checked the structure past Warm Creek. The door was ajar by 3 inches. I saw it from 20 feet away, the gap between the steel door and the concrete frame. I stopped immediately and aimed my flashlight at the opening. I could see nothing inside except darkness. I did not approach. I did not close the door. I returned to the cabin and filed a written report. I sealed it in an envelope and placed it in the outgoing bin. Then I sat at the table and stared at the wall, trying not to think about what might have come out of that structure. On Wednesday, Marcia radioed at 0300 hours during my patrol. Northeast 12, this is dispatch, respond. Dispatch, Northeast 12, go ahead. Northeast 12, what is your current location? Southern switchback, proceeding north. Copy, Northeast 12. Be advised we have received multiple reports of individuals in the Northeast sector who are not authorized personnel. Do not engage. If you encounter anyone, note their description and continue your patrol. Copy, dispatch. Can you provide descriptions? Negative, Northeast 12. Descriptions are inconsistent. Exercise caution. Copy. I continued north, more alert now, scanning the trail ahead. At 0341 hours, I saw someone standing at marker 7. It was a woman wearing a Park Service uniform. She stood motionless beside the cairns, her hands at her sides. As I approached, she turned to face me. She was young, perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back in a bun. Her uniform was clean and crisp. She smiled. Evening, she said. I nodded but did not speak. You're Northeast 12, she said. I'm Northeast 14. I'm taking over the northern perimeter. There was no Northeast 14. The sector assignments ran 12, 13, and 15. 13 was vacant. 14 did not exist. I said nothing. I need you to show me the route, she said. Kendall said you'd help me get oriented. I shook my head and continued walking. Wait, she called. I need your help, please. I did not stop. She did not follow. At 0500 hours, Marcia radioed with the final check-in. I reported the encounter and returned to the cabin. I counted the windows before entering. There were 4. On Thursday, Kendall finally radioed. Northeast 12, this is Kendall, respond. I grabbed the radio. Kendall, Northeast 12, go ahead. Northeast 12, I need you to suspend patrols for the next 72 hours. Remain in the cabin. Do not leave for any reason except fire or medical emergency. Copy, Kendall. Can you explain? We're implementing emergency protocols due to increased activity in your sector. You'll find the protocols in the binder, Section 3. Read them now. I'll contact you in 72 hours. Copy, Kendall. The transmission ended. I opened the binder to Section 3. The header read, Emergency Protocols, Northeast Sector. 1. During emergency protocol periods, you will remain in the cabin with all windows and doors secured. Cover all windows with the blackout curtains stored in the equipment locker. Do not look outside. Do not open the door for any reason except fire or medical emergency. 2. You will maintain radio silence except for scheduled check-ins at 0600, 1400, and 2200 hours. During check-ins, respond only with your designation and status. Do not request additional information. Do not report incidents unless explicitly asked. 3. You may hear knocking on the doors or windows. Do not respond. Do not look. Do not open the door. If the knocking continues for more than 10 minutes, move to the center of the cabin and sit on the floor with your back to the door. Count slowly to 300. The knocking will stop. 4. You may hear voices outside the cabin calling your name, your designation, or asking for help. Do not respond. Do not open the door. If the voices claim to be Kendall, Marcia, or any other authorized personnel, do not respond. Authorized personnel will not approach the cabin during emergency protocol periods. 5. If the power fails, use the battery-powered lantern stored in the equipment locker. Do not use candles. Do not use the propane heater. Do not attempt to restore power. Sit in the center of the cabin with the lantern and wait for dawn. I hung blackout curtains over all 4 windows and secured the doors. I filled water bottles and ate a cold meal. At 1400 hours, I radioed Marcia. Dispatch Northeast 12, status green. Copy Northeast 12, maintain emergency protocols. At 1800 hours, the knocking began. It started at the south-facing door. 3 slow knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. I sat at the table and opened my book, trying to ignore the sound. The knocking continued, steady and patient. At 1813 hours, it moved to the north-facing window. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. I moved to the center of the cabin and sat on the floor with my back to the door. I began counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The knocking circled the cabin, moving from window to window, door to door. 51, 52, 53. A voice called from outside. Hello? Is someone in there? I need help. 103, 104. Please, the voice said. I'm lost. I'm cold. Please let me in. 158, 159. Northeast 12, the voice said. It sounded like Kendall. Open the door. I need to brief you. 212, 213. The knocking stopped at 287. I waited until I reached 300, then stood slowly and returned to the table. The cabin was silent except for the wind. I did not look at the windows. At 2200 hours, I radioed Marcia. Dispatch Northeast 12, status green. Copy Northeast 12, maintain emergency protocols. The knocking resumed at 2300 hours. This time I moved to the center of the cabin immediately and counted to 300. The knocking stopped at 291. On Friday, the pattern repeated. Knocking at irregular intervals, voices calling for help, voices imitating Kendall and Marcia. I counted through each episode, sitting on the floor in the center of the cabin, staring at the blackout curtains. At 0200 hours on Saturday, the power failed. The cabin went dark except for the faint glow of my watch. I fumbled for the equipment locker and found the battery-powered lantern. I turned it on and sat in the center of the cabin with the lantern beside me. The knocking began again, louder now, as if something were hitting the door with a closed fist instead of knuckles. I closed my eyes and counted. 1, 2, 3. Let me in, a voice said. It sounded like my sister. It's cold out here, please. 54, 55. The door handle rattled. 101, 102. I know you're in there, the voice said. It didn't sound like my sister anymore. It didn't sound like anyone. I can hear you breathing. 173, 174. The knocking stopped at 241. I opened my eyes. The lantern cast weak shadows across the floor. I sat until dawn, not moving, not sleeping. At 0600 hours, I radioed Marcia. Dispatch Northeast 12, status green. Copy Northeast 12. Emergency protocols lifted at 1400 hours. Kendall will contact you with further instructions. Copy dispatch. At 1400 hours exactly, Kendall radioed. Northeast 12, this is Kendall. Emergency protocols are now lifted. You may resume patrols tonight at 1900 hours. There are additional amendments in the binder. Read them before your shift. Copy, Kendall. What was the emergency? Increased activity, Kendall said. It happens every October. The activity usually subsides after the first hard freeze. We're expecting temperatures in the teens tonight, so you should be clear. Copy. One more thing, Kendall said. Davidson is missing. If you encounter anyone claiming to be Davidson, do not engage. File a written report immediately. Copy. Kendall. I opened the binder and found the new amendments. There were 6 of them, all adding restrictions to existing rules. The Lamar station was now off limits entirely. I was to use the alternate trail at all times. The structure past Warm Creek was to be checked every night, and I was to note whether the door was closed, ajar, or open. If open, I was to retreat immediately and not return to that section of trail for 48 hours. I prepared for my shift and left the cabin at 1900 hours. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees. Ice crusted the trail and my breath plumed white in the flashlight beam. I crossed Slough Creek at the alternate ford, wading through ankle-deep water that numbed my feet in seconds. I reached the northern ridge at 2100 hours and radioed Marcia. Dispatch, Northeast 12, check in at Northern Ridge, no incidents. Copy Northeast 12, conditions are stable, proceed. I continued east, moving carefully over the ice trail. At 22:38 hours, I checked the structure past Warm Creek. The door was closed and flush with the frame. The lock was secure. I returned to the main trail and continued south. At 01:44 hours, I found another campfire. This one was smaller, burning in the same clearing where I had seen the first fire. The flames were low and steady. There was no one sitting beside it, no one facing away. I noted the location and continued my patrol without stopping. At 0300 hours, I heard something walking parallel to me through the forest. It was perhaps 30 yards to my east, moving at the same pace I was walking. I could hear branches snapping and the crunch of ice underfoot. I slowed. The sounds slowed. I increased my pace. The sounds increased. It was not following me. It was pacing me. I checked my watch. 03:07. I was still a mile from the southern switchback. I continued walking, listening to the footsteps in the trees. They did not come closer. They did not fall behind. At 03:21 hours, the footsteps stopped. I stopped as well, listening. The forest was silent except for the wind. Then I heard a voice, low and flat, speaking from the darkness to my east. "We see you." I did not respond. I continued walking. The voice spoke again. "We know your name." I increased my pace, focusing on the trail ahead. The voice did not follow. I reached the cabin at 05:46 hours and filed a written report. I counted the windows before entering. There were 4. The patrols continued through October with increasing frequency of incidents. I heard voices almost every night. I saw lights moving through the forest. I found campfires burning in clearings where no campers should have been. Twice I encountered people in Park Service uniforms who asked me to accompany them, and twice I declined and continued my patrol. On the 3rd Tuesday of October, I crossed the Slough Creek Bridge in 8 seconds and heard something large moving beneath it. I did not look down. On the 4th Monday, I checked the structure past Warm Creek and found the door standing wide open. I retreated immediately and did not return to that section of trail for 48 hours. When I finally returned, the door was closed again, the lock secure. On the 1st of November, the snow began. It fell in heavy, wet flakes that blanketed the trail and muffled all sound. The temperature dropped to single digits. I wore every layer I owned and still felt the cold seeping through. My patrols took longer now, the trail slippery and treacherous, the distances harder to judge in the whiteout conditions. Kendall radioed on the 2nd of November. "Northeast 12, this is Kendall. Be advised, we're closing the northeast sector to all visitor access effective immediately. You are the only authorized personnel in the area. If you encounter anyone, do not engage. File a written report." "Copy, Kendall. Are you pulling me out?" "Negative, Northeast 12. Your contract runs through December 15th. After that, the sector goes dark for the winter." "Copy." I continued my patrols alone in the snow. On the 9th of November, I encountered a person who looked exactly like me. It was 02:53 hours, and I was descending the southern switchback. I saw a figure standing at the next turn, perhaps 50 yards ahead. As I approached, I realized the figure was wearing the same jacket I was wearing, the same boots, the same pack. The figure turned to face me, and I saw my own face staring back. I stopped. The figure stopped. I took a step forward. The figure took a step forward. I raised my flashlight. The figure raised a flashlight. We stood there, 20 yards apart, perfect mirrors. Then the figure smiled. I had not smiled. I turned and walked back up the trail, taking the long route around the switchback. I did not look back. When I reached the bottom of the hill 40 minutes later, the figure was gone. I filed a written report and added it to the stack. The stack was now 3 inches thick. On the 15th of November, Marcia radioed with an urgent message. Northeast 12 dispatch, emergency protocols in effect immediately. Return to cabin and secure all access points. Do not leave until instructed. Copy, dispatch. What's the situation? We've lost contact with Tower Junction. Davidson's sector is dark. We're implementing emergency protocols across all northern sectors until we can verify status. Copy, dispatch. Returning to cabin now. I was 2 miles from the cabin. I moved as quickly as the snow allowed, half jogging over the ice trail. I reached the cabin at 04:37 hours and secured the doors and windows. I hung the blackout curtains and moved to the center of the room. The knocking began at 0500 hours. It lasted until dawn, circling the cabin in the same patient rhythm I had heard before. Voices called my name, called for help, imitated Kendall and Marcia. I counted through each episode, sitting on the floor, staring at nothing. At 0600 hours, Marcia radioed. Dispatch Northeast 12, status green. Copy, Northeast 12, maintain emergency protocols until further notice. The protocols remained in effect for 6 days. During those 6 days, I did not leave the cabin. I rationed my food and water. I listened to the knocking and the voices. I counted to 300 over and over until the numbers lost meaning. I slept in short bursts, waking to the sound of fists on the door or my own name being called in a voice I almost recognized. On the 21st of November, Kendall radioed. Northeast 12, this is Kendall. Emergency protocols are lifted. You may resume patrols at 1900 hours. Be advised, Tower Junction is being evacuated. Davidson was not found. His sector is now closed indefinitely. Copy, Kendall. One more thing, Kendall said. You're being reassigned effective December 1st. You'll patrol from the cabin through the end of November, then we're pulling you out for the winter. A replacement will take over in March. Copy, Kendall. I resumed patrols that night. The snow was now 2 feet deep on the trail, and the temperature had dropped to 5 below zero. I moved slowly, testing each step, the cold so intense that my flashlight beam seemed dimmer, as if the darkness were thicker, harder to penetrate. At 2200 hours, I reached the alternate trail around the Lamar station. I was halfway through when I heard tapping on glass. I stopped. The tapping was coming from the station, which should have been a quarter mile to the west. But the sound was close, perhaps 20 feet away. I aimed my flashlight into the trees. I saw nothing. The tapping continued, rhythmic and patient. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. I checked my watch. 22:08. I was in the restricted interval. I continued walking, keeping my eyes on the trail. The tapping followed me, staying just at the edge of hearing, circling through the trees. It did not stop until I was clear of the area at 22:31 hours. On the 25th of November, I checked the structure past Warm Creek for the last time. The door was open again, standing wide like a mouth. I marked the location and retreated. On the 30th of November, I completed my final patrol. It was a quiet night, cold and still with no wind and no voices. I crossed the Slough Creek ford for the last time, wading through water that had frozen into slush. I passed Marker 7 and the cairns and the lightning-scarred snag. I saw no lights in the forest. I heard no footsteps. At 05:32 hours, I returned to the cabin. I filled out the final patrol log, noting the date and time and the lack of incidents. I counted the windows before entering. There were 4. On the 1st of December, Kendall arrived with a replacement ranger. Her name was Sullivan. She was young, perhaps 26, with short red hair and a nervous smile. Kendall introduced us briefly, then handed her the binder. "This is your operational manual," he said. "Read it tonight before your first shift. Follow every instruction exactly as written. If you have questions, radio Marcia, but only during standard check-in windows. Do not improvise." Sullivan opened the binder and began reading. I saw her eyes widen as she scanned the first page. Kendall turned to me. "Your gear is packed. I'll drive you to Mammoth. You'll be debriefed there and then released." I nodded. I looked at Sullivan, who was still reading, her face pale in the cabin's dim light. "Good luck," I said. She looked up. Did you ever see anything?" I thought about the lights in the forest, the footsteps on the trail, the voice that knew my name. I thought about the door standing open at the structure past Warm Creek and the person sitting at the fire facing away, and the figure on the switchback that wore my face. "No," I said. "I followed the protocols." Kendall and I walked to his truck. As we drove away, I looked back at the cabin. Sullivan was standing in the doorway, the binder in her hands, staring out at the forest. I turned forward and did not look back again. At Mammoth, I was debriefed by a woman I had never met. She asked me about incidents, encounters, deviations from protocol. I answered truthfully but briefly. She made notes in a file that already contained my written reports, stacked and labeled by date. "You did well," she said. "Most people don't make it through the full contract." "What happened to Davidson?" I asked. She closed the file. "We don't know. His cabin was empty, his gear was intact, his patrol logs stopped on November 10th. We searched the area for 3 days and found nothing." "And Harris?" "Harris is in a care facility in Bozeman. He still can't remember his name." She handed me a check for the full contract amount plus a completion bonus I had not expected. I signed a non-disclosure agreement and a waiver releasing the Park Service from liability for any psychological effects I might experience. "Will you be back in March?" she asked. "No." She nodded as if she had expected this answer. I drove to Bozeman and stayed in a motel for 3 days, sleeping with the lights on and the curtains open. On the 4th day, I drove south to Wyoming and did not stop until I reached Laramie. I found an apartment and a job at a hardware store. I tried not to think about the cabin or the forest or the nights. But sometimes, late at night, I hear knocking. 3 knocks. A pause, 3 knocks. And sometimes I hear a voice calling my name from somewhere I cannot see. I do not answer. I have learned the protocols. I know what happens to people who do not follow the protocols. I know what waits in the forest when the sun sets and the rules are all that stand between you and the dark. I know, and I do not answer. I never answer. Before I left Mammoth, the woman who debriefed me handed me a sealed envelope. "This is for you," she said, "in case you ever decide to come back." I took it without comment and slid it into my jacket pocket. The paper felt thick, official. I did not open it in front of her. I waited until I was in the motel parking lot in Gardner, sitting in my truck with the engine running and the heater blowing stale air. The envelope was unmarked, sealed with clear tape. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed in the same plain font as the operational manual, the same narrow margins, the same absence of logos or letterhead. At the top it read, "Supplemental Guidance, Former Northeast Sector Personnel." I read it twice before the words fully registered. 1. You may experience residual effects from your time in the Northeast Sector. These effects may include auditory phenomena, visual disturbances, or a persistent sense of being observed. These effects are normal and will diminish over time. 2. If you hear knocking at your residence, ignore it. Do not open the door. Do not look out the window. The knocking will stop on its own. 3. If you hear your name called in a voice you recognize, do not respond unless you can see the person speaking. If you cannot see them, assume it is not them. 4. Avoid returning to Yellowstone National Park for at least 1 year following the end of your contract. If you must return, do not enter the Northeast sector. Do not inquire about current conditions in the Northeast sector. Do not contact active personnel assigned to the Northeast sector. 5. If you experience severe or persistent symptoms, contact the Park Service Medical Coordinator at the number provided below. Do not seek treatment from civilian providers. Do not discuss your experiences with anyone outside the Park Service. 6. You are reminded that the non-disclosure agreement you signed remains in effect indefinitely. Violation of this agreement may result in legal action and revocation of all benefits. 7. Thank you for your service. There was no signature, no printed name. Just the phone number at the bottom, a Montana area code I did not recognize. I sat in the truck for a long time reading the list over and over. The engine ticked as it cooled. Snow began to fall, light flakes that melted on the windshield. The woman had said the effects were normal. She had said they would diminish over time, but she had also given me a list of protocols to follow at home, in civilian life, in places where there should be no protocols. She had acknowledged that whatever had been in the forest might follow me out. I thought about Harris in the care facility in Bozeman, unable to remember his name. I thought about Davidson missing, his cabin empty and his patrol logs ending with no explanation. I thought about Sullivan reading the operational manual for the first time, her face pale in the cabin's dim light. I folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. I drove to the dumpster behind the motel and threw the envelope inside, burying it under a bag of trash from the restaurant next door. Then I got back in my truck and drove south. I did not stop in Bozeman. I did not stop in Livingston or Big Timber or Billings. I drove through the night, watching the odometer click over mile after mile, putting distance between myself and the park. I crossed into Wyoming at dawn and kept driving. I did not stop until I reached Laramie, 273 miles from Mammoth, far enough that the mountains were different and the forests were different, and the rules, I hoped, would not apply. That was 8 weeks ago. I rented an apartment on the north side of town, a second-floor unit with 4 windows, 2 facing the street, 1 facing the alley, 1 facing the parking lot. I counted them before I signed the lease. The landlord thought I was being thorough. I did not correct him. I found a job at a hardware store on Grand Avenue, stocking shelves and helping customers find the right screws, the right paint, the right light bulbs. The work was mindless and steady. I showed up on time. I followed the employee handbook. I did not talk about where I had been or what I had done. When people asked, I said I had worked for the Park Service. When they asked which park, I said it didn't matter. The knocking started on the 4th night. I was lying in bed half asleep when I heard it. 3 knocks on the front door, a pause, 3 more knocks. I sat up and checked the clock. 2:37 a.m. I did not get up. I did not turn on the light. I lay there in the dark and listened. The knocking continued for 11 minutes. I counted the seconds. At 11 minutes and 14 seconds, it stopped. I did not go to the door. I did not look out the window. In the morning, I checked the door. There were no marks, no scratches, no footprints in the hallway. The neighbors had heard nothing. The knocking returned every night for 2 weeks, sometimes at the door, sometimes at the windows, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always the same rhythm. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. I learned to sleep through it. I learned to ignore it, just as the supplemental guidance had instructed. On the 16th night, it stopped. I heard my name for the first time 3 days later. I was walking home from work, cutting through the parking lot behind my building. The sun had set and the streetlights were just coming on. I heard a voice call from somewhere behind me. "Hey!" I turned. There was no one there. The voice called again. "Over here." It sounded like my sister. She lived in Oregon. I had not spoken to her in 6 months. I kept walking. I did not answer. I did not look for the source. The voice followed me to my apartment door. "Why won't you answer me? I need to talk to you." I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. I locked the deadbolt and put my back against the door. I listened. I heard nothing. After that, I heard voices regularly. Sometimes my sister, sometimes Marcia, sometimes Kendall. Once I heard my mother, who had been dead for 3 years. The voices called from alleys, from parked cars, from the shadows between buildings. I never answered. I never looked. The visual disturbances came later. I would see movement at the edge of my vision, a shadow that shifted when I was not looking directly at it. I would see shapes in the darkness outside my windows that resolved into nothing when I turned on the lights. Once I saw someone standing at the end of my hallway when I woke at 3 a.m. I closed my eyes and counted to 60. When I opened them, the figure was gone. I learned to live with it. I learned to function. I went to work. I paid my rent. I bought groceries and cooked meals and did laundry and tried to build a normal life. But sometimes late at night, when I could not sleep, I would take out the maps I had kept from the cabin. I had not thrown them away with the envelope. I had folded them carefully and tucked them in the bottom of my closet beneath a box of winter clothes I never wore. I would spread the maps on my kitchen table and trace the patrol route with my finger. Slough Creek to Pebble Creek, the footbridge that had to be crossed in fewer than 10 seconds. The switchbacks where I had seen the figure wearing my face. The ridge with marker 7 and the cairns. The structure past Warm Creek with its red triangle and its door that would not stay closed. I would trace the route and count the miles. 18 miles, 9 hours at a steady pace. I had walked it 47 times. I wondered who was walking it now. I wondered if Sullivan had made it through her first week. I wondered if she had heard the knocking on the cabin door, if she had counted to 300 sitting on the floor in the center of the room. I wondered if she had seen the lights moving through the forest east of Pebble Creek, if she had heard the child crying, if she had encountered the person at the campfire sitting with their back to the flames. I wondered if she had opened the door at the structure past Warm Creek. I wondered what would happen if she did. The woman at the debriefing had said most people did not make it through the full contract. She had said I had done well, but she had also given me a list of protocols to follow for the rest of my life, and she had told me never to come back. I thought about calling the Park Service medical coordinator. The number was still in my phone, saved under emergency contact, even though I had thrown away the paper. I thought about calling and asking about Sullivan, about Davidson, about Harris. I thought about asking what had happened in the Northeast sector that required such protocols, why the rules existed, what would happen if someone broke them. But I never called, because I already knew what would happen. I had seen Harris's patrol logs, the entries that became shorter and more erratic until they stopped altogether. I had read the incident reports filed by rangers who had come before me, reports that described the same phenomena I had experienced, the voices, the lights, the figures that looked almost human but moved wrong. I had walked past the Lamar Ranger Station and heard the knocking on the window during the restricted interval. I had seen the door standing open at the structure past Warm Creek, and I had retreated, and I had not looked inside. I knew. The symptoms were diminishing just as the supplemental guidance had said they would. The knocking had stopped after 2 weeks. The voices were less frequent now, coming every few days instead of every day. The shadows at the edge of my vision were fainter. I was learning to ignore them. I was learning to live with the residual effects. I was learning to follow the protocols even here, even now, in an apartment in Laramie where there should be no protocols. Because the rules were not just for the northeast sector. The rules were for anyone who had been there, anyone who had walked the trails and heard the voices and seen the things that moved in the darkness beyond the flashlight beam. The rules followed you out. The rules became part of you. I understood that now. I understood why Harris could not remember his name. He had broken the protocols. He had looked at the window. He had followed the lights. He had opened the door. And whatever was on the other side had taken something from him that could not be returned. I would not make the same mistake. I checked the windows before bed every night. 4 windows, always 4. I did not answer voices unless I could see who was speaking. I did not open the door when I heard knocking. I maintained the protocols, and slowly, carefully, I built a life that looked normal from the outside. But sometimes, late at night, I would wake at 2:37 and listen for the knocking that no longer came. I would lie in the dark and think about the cabin, the forest, the 18-mile patrol route. I would think about the structure past Warm Creek and wonder what was inside, what had come out when the door stood open, what walked the trails now that winter had closed the sector. I would think about Sullivan. I wondered if she was still there. I wondered if she had made it to Christmas, to New Year, to the end of January. I wondered if she would make it to March when her contract ended and a new ranger took her place. I wondered if anyone would. The Park Service would find someone, they always did. Someone who needed the money, someone running from something, someone who thought they could handle the isolation and the cold and the long nights. Someone who would read the operational manual and think the rules were excessive, unnecessary, the product of bureaucratic caution rather than hard-won experience. Someone who would learn, as I had learned, that the rules were all that stood between you and the things that waited in the darkness. I folded the maps and put them back in the closet. I went to bed and tried to sleep. Outside my window, the wind moved through the bare trees, and somewhere in the distance I heard footsteps on the stairs that stopped when they reached my floor. I did not get up to look. I followed the protocols. I always followed the protocols, because I knew what happened when you did not follow the protocols. I knew what waited in the places where the rules were thin, and I would never go back.